I was traveling solo, a much-anticipated vacation to a foreign country. The exotic allure of new cultures and places had always called to me. This was my chance to embrace the adventure, to see the world beyond the familiar. Little did I know that this journey would soon turn into a nightmare. Everything started out perfectly. The vibrant streets, the welcoming locals, the delicious food, I was soaking it all in. But one fateful afternoon, as I was exploring a bustling market, I felt a jolt of panic. My bag, with my passport, wallet, and identity, was gone. I had been pickpocketed. Fear surged through me as I realized the gravity of the situation. My passport was my lifeline, my key to this foreign world. I had no way to prove who I was, no money, and no means to contact my embassy. The realization that I was stranded in an unfamiliar country began to sink in. I retraced my steps in a frantic search for the thief or any trace of my belongings, but it was a futile endeavor. I turned to the local authorities for help, but the language barrier made communication difficult. They tried their best to understand my situation, but the odds of recovering my passport were slim. With a heavy heart, I returned to my hostel. I felt utterly vulnerable, alone in a foreign land without identification or means to return home. My room, once a safe haven, felt like a prison. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and despair. The days turned into a relentless nightmare. I visited my embassy, a long and frustrating process in itself. They confirmed my identity and provided me with a temporary travel document, but it would take time to process. Time that I couldn't afford. Desperation led me to seek assistance from locals, and it was in the kindness of strangers that I found glimmers of hope. A compassionate local family, empathetic to my plight, took me in and provided food and shelter. Their generosity touched my heart, and it gave me the strength to persevere. But the journey was far from over. The journey of obtaining visas, replacing lost belongings, and proving my identity was a bureaucratic nightmare. Each step was fraught with obstacles. Each day in a foreign land was a test of my resilience. Throughout the ordeal, I remained vigilant and cautious. The experience had shown me the darker side of travel, the vulnerability that came with exploration. I'd lost not only my belongings, but also my sense of security. The once exciting streets felt like a maze of uncertainty, each stranger potentially a threat. The moment of liberation came when I finally held the temporary travel document in my hand. I couldn't contain my relief and gratitude, knowing that I could finally return home. But the journey had taken its toll. The once vibrant adventure had been tainted by the harsh reality of the world. I returned home with a new perspective, an enduring appreciation for the security of my own country. The experience had been a test of my strength and resourcefulness, but it had also taught me that even in the darkest of moments, there could be glimmers of hope. Our group of friends had always been the adventurous sort. We yearned for unique experiences, far removed from the usual tourist traps. This time, we decided to charter a boat to a remote, uninhabited island. The prospect of pristine beaches, untouched jungles, and isolation had enticed us. Little did we know that this escapade would turn into a living nightmare. As we approached the island, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The island had a rugged beauty, but it also bore the aura of isolation. Our excitement outweighed our reservations as we disembarked onto the sandy shore, leaving the boat behind to give us the much-needed seclusion. Our days on the island were idyllic at first, with beachcombing, exploration, and campfires under the starlit sky. It was the stuff of dreams. But that dream quickly soured when we stumbled upon a modest, isolated hut, nestled deep within the jungle. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to investigate. The hut was surrounded by a lush garden, giving off an eerie sense of tranquility. The door was ajar, and as we peered inside, our joyous adventure took a chilling turn. The hut's inhabitant was a reclusive islander, a wiry, sun-worn man with an intensity in his eyes that sent shivers down our spines. He seemed to have no intention of welcoming us. His voice was gruff and laced with a warning, instructing us to leave and never return. We were shocked, but not willing to give up our precious escape so easily. Ignoring his threats, we explained that we were merely explorers, meaning no harm. It was a mistake that would haunt us. The islander's demeanor darkened, his gaze locking onto us with a predatory intensity. He stepped closer, blocking the doorway and making it clear that we were not free to go. Panic set in as the reality of our situation became evident. We were trapped. Days turned into nights, and it became apparent that our isolated paradise had become our prison. The islander was deranged, convinced that we were invaders who sought to disrupt his solitary existence. Our pleas and negotiations fell on deaf ears. His demands were simple: obey or remain captive. We resorted to sneaking messages to the boat's crew, pleading for their assistance in secret. Each attempt was foiled, and the islander grew more menacing. He was aware of our every move, and we soon realized that our captor was not alone. His crude network of traps and alarms encircled us, and escape seemed impossible. The isolation, fear, and helplessness gnawed at our sanity. The islander was a master of psychological torment, toying with our minds. He recounted tales of past intruders who met gruesome fates. We were shown grisly mementos of their presence, personal items and trinkets stolen from the deceased. Our situation grew dire as we witnessed the lengths to which the islander would go to protect his solitude. His threats turned into violent actions. We were beaten, starved, and held hostage in that wretched hut. The island had turned from a dreamland into a macabre prison, and we feared it would be our tomb. Time seemed to blur, but we refused to give up hope. We hatched a daring plan, carefully biding our time, searching for any opportunity to escape. When the moment finally arrived, we seized it, overpowering the islander with our combined desperation. It was a struggle, one that left us battered and bruised, but we emerged victorious. Our liberation came at a cost, a heavy one that left us scarred both physically and emotionally. As we sped away from that forsaken island, our hearts were heavy with the knowledge of the darkness that had lurked beneath its tranquil facade. It was supposed to be a grand adventure, a guided tour through the exotic landscapes of a foreign country. My friends, Tom and Sarah, and I had eagerly signed up, thrilled at the prospect of exploring a new culture and its breathtaking vistas. Little did we know that our journey would take a nightmarish turn. The tour had all the trappings of an unforgettable experience. Our guides, Andre and Elena, were warm and knowledgeable, their smiles inviting. As we set off on the journey, their tales of local legends and customs enthralled us. The days were filled with laughter, exploration, and the camaraderie of fellow travelers. However, as we ventured deeper into the foreign land, the mood shifted and the idyllic atmosphere darkened. The guides' smiles grew sinister, their friendliness replaced with a chilling coldness. Unease spread among our group, but it wasn't until one fateful night that we discovered their true intentions. It was at a remote campsite, nestled among dense woods, where the nightmare began. As we settled in for the evening, the guides ordered us to leave our belongings behind and gather around the campfire. Their demands felt arbitrary, but the sense of dread in the air was palpable. That's when the truth hit us like a hammer blow. Andre and Elena were not the tour guides we thought they were. They were criminals, and our group had unknowingly stumbled into their trap. Panic surged through us as they revealed their intentions. We were hostages, pawns in their sinister game. As the night grew darker, the guides took control. They were well armed, their weapons a stark reminder of our vulnerability. The campfire that had once been a source of warmth and comfort now cast eerie shadows, and the laughter of fellow travelers had been replaced by silent, terrified glances. The long hours of captivity turned into days. Our freedom was a distant memory, our captors' control absolute. They threatened us with violence and instilled fear with their unpredictability. We were given minimal food and water, enough to keep us alive, but far from comfortable. The passing days blurred together, and our determination to escape grew stronger. We knew that surrender was not an option. The opportunity to break free finally arrived during a rare moment when the guides were distracted, bickering among themselves. We seized the chance, overpowering one of our captors and wresting his weapon from his grip. Panic and desperation fueled our actions as we fought to subdue the other guide. It was a fierce struggle, but the will to survive propelled us forward. With our captors incapacitated, we had no time to waste. We fled into the wilderness, guided only by the stars and our determination to escape this horrifying ordeal. We knew the guides would come after us, but our determination to evade them was unwavering. The journey back to civilization was grueling, filled with hardships, but we were fueled by the promise of freedom. And ultimately, we succeeded, reaching safety in the authorities who would bring the criminals to justice. My heart raced as my friends and I found ourselves in the middle of a nightmare in a seemingly ordinary hostel during our backpacking adventure in Europe. The night had started like any other, with laughter and shared stories over a few drinks in the hostel's common room. Little did we know the dark turn our night would take. The hostel had been a cost-effective choice, a place to rest our weary bodies after a long day of exploration. It was our first night in this quaint European town, and we were eager to see all it had to offer. The staff at the hostel seemed friendly enough when we checked in, their smiles and pleasantries putting us at ease. As night fell and our group retreated to our shared dormitory, a sense of unease settled upon us. The hostel's hallways grew eerily quiet, the cheerful ambience of the earlier evening vanishing. The door to our dormitory had no lock from the inside, and that's when we realized that something was terribly wrong. I approached the front desk to request a lock for our room, and that's when I noticed the staff's behavior had turned sinister. They had a disturbing gleam in their eyes, and as I asked for the lock, they only smiled eerily and handed me an old, rusted key that seemed barely functional. We returned to our dormitory, sharing our growing unease. Just as we were about to leave, we discovered something horrifying. The door had been locked from the outside, trapping us within. Panic surged through our group, and we frantically tried to force the door open. It wouldn't budge. As the minutes turned to hours, we attempted to alert other guests in the hostel, pounding on the walls and shouting for help. But the building's isolation made it impossible for anyone to hear our desperate pleas. It became evident that our captors, the hostel staff, had sinister intentions. With each passing hour, our situation grew more desperate. The staff refused to acknowledge our pleas or demands for release. Hunger and exhaustion set in, and it was clear that they had no intention of letting us go. As the night turned into a terrifying ordeal, we had no choice but to take matters into our own hands. With makeshift tools and sheer determination, we attempted to break the door open. It was a grueling, nerve-wracking process, but the fear of what awaited us at the hands of our captors fueled our efforts. Eventually, we managed to pry the door open, but what we discovered on the other side was a gruesome sight. The hostel staff had been waiting for us, their sinister intentions clear. A desperate struggle ensued, and we managed to overpower them, summoning help from nearby guests. The authorities arrived, and the staff members were taken into custody. Our ordeal had come to an end, but the trauma and fear it left behind would forever haunt our memories. What had started as a routine night in a budget hostel had turned into a nightmare we would never forget. My name is Jessica, and I am going to tell you what happened when I went traveling a few years back. Traveling alone can be both exhilarating and daunting. As a solo traveler, I had experienced countless adventures and met people from all walks of life. However, one particular encounter would forever haunt me and serve as a chilling reminder that not everyone you meet on the road has good intentions. I had arrived in a picturesque European town, a place that seemed straight out of a fairy tale. After a day of exploring cobblestone streets and ancient architecture, I decided to unwind at a local bar. The place had a cozy, inviting atmosphere, and I settled into a corner seat. As I sipped my drink and observed the locals enjoying their evening, a stranger entered the bar. He had a certain charm about him, an air of sophistication that immediately caught my attention. He approached the bar and ordered a drink, then cast a warm smile in my direction. We struck up a conversation, and he introduced himself as Oliver. He seemed genuinely interested in my travels, asking questions about my adventures and sharing stories of his own. His charm and charisma were disarming, making it easy to feel comfortable in his presence. Time flew by as we chatted about life, travel, and dreams. The hours turned into a blur, and I realized that I had lost track of time. It was then that Oliver suggested we continue our conversation at his place, which was just a short walk from the bar. I hesitated for a moment, considering the risks of going to a stranger's home. But his charm and seemingly genuine nature persuaded me to agree. We left the bar and strolled through the dimly lit streets to his apartment. The city was quiet, and I couldn't help but marvel at the charm of the place even at night. However, a nagging sense of unease gnawed at me as we approached Oliver's building. Once inside his apartment, I realized how isolated we were. The room was dimly lit, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Oliver poured us another drink and continued our conversation. However, his tone had shifted, becoming more insistent and unsettling. As the night wore on, his intentions became chillingly clear. He had no interest in conversation or connection. His intentions were far more sinister. My attempts to leave were met with threats, and I found myself trapped in a terrifying situation. Fear surged through me as I realized the gravity of the predicament. Oliver's charming facade had been a mask, concealing a malevolent side that had now emerged. I knew I had to think fast if I were to escape this nightmare. With my heart pounding, I seized an opportunity when he momentarily let his guard down. In a desperate bid for freedom, I fought back with all the strength I could muster. The ensuing struggle was harrowing, and the room became a chaotic battleground. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to break free and escape the apartment. I ran through the empty streets, the cobblestones cold beneath my feet. My heart raced, and a torrent of emotions flooded my senses. I finally found safety when I stumbled upon a group of locals who alerted the authorities. Oliver was taken into custody, but the trauma of that night would stay with me forever. It was a stark reminder that danger could hide behind even the most charming facades. As a solo traveler, I had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of caution and intuition, but the memory of that night would forever haunt my journey. My husband had booked our annual vacation at a remote cabin in the woods. It was the perfect getaway we had all yearned for, a chance to disconnect from the chaos and reconnect with each other. Little did we know that this retreat would soon turn into a horrifying nightmare that would forever haunt our memories. The cabin was nestled in the heart of the forest, surrounded by towering trees and an almost eerie silence. It was a stark contrast to the constant noise of the city, and the isolation of the location made us feel like we were the only people in the world. We settled into the cabin, enjoying the simplicity of life off the grid. Days were spent hiking, fishing, and sharing stories around a campfire. It was a dream come true for our family. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the forest came alive with nocturnal sounds, a feeling of unease began to creep over us. One evening, as we gathered around the dinner table, we heard faint rustling from outside the cabin. I dismissed it as the sounds of the wilderness, but my husband, John, grew more concerned. He decided to investigate, grabbing a flashlight and heading into the inky darkness. Minutes felt like hours as we anxiously waited for his return. The unsettling sounds continued, echoing through the forest. When John finally came back, he was pale, his eyes filled with dread. He told us he had heard voices, whispers in the woods. They weren't the normal sounds of nature, they were the murmurs of people. Fear not at us, but we reassured ourselves that it must have been our imagination playing tricks on us. We locked the cabin doors and tried to calm our racing hearts, but sleep remained elusive. The whispers outside had grown louder and more distinct, and it became apparent that they weren't just figments of our imagination. The night was long and restless, and we awoke the next morning exhausted and apprehensive. John decided to take a walk in the woods, hoping to put his unease to rest by searching for the source of the whispers. As the hours ticked by, anxiety grew, and we began to wonder if something was amiss. It was when we heard gunshots in the distance that panic set in. We knew that we had to find John and get to safety. Gathering our children, we ventured into the forest, our frantic calls echoing through the trees. We followed the sound of the gunshots, leading us to a clearing where our worst fears were realized. A group of hunters, camouflaged and armed, had mistaken John for wild game. Their realization that they had killed an innocent man was etched across their faces as they stared at us in shock and horror. The woods, once our sanctuary, had become a hunting ground, and we were the prey. Fear, anger, and grief surged through me as we confronted the hunters. We demanded that they call for help, but they hesitated, knowing the consequences they would face for their reckless actions. As the tension rose, we realized that we were not only dealing with hunters, but with individuals willing to do anything to avoid the repercussions of their actions. Desperation pushed us to fight for our lives. We overcame the hunters, disarming them and taking control of the situation. Our focus was now on getting help and justice for John. We bound the hunters and marched them back to the cabin, or we could call the authorities and secure our safety. The nightmare had unfolded in the quiet depths of the forest, and as the police arrived, we knew that our lives would never be the same. The cabin, once a symbol of escape and serenity, was forever tainted by the horrific events that had transpired. It was supposed to be a dreamy, romantic getaway for my wife, Sarah, and me. We'd been married for 5 years and felt the need to escape the demands of everyday life. We picked a charming, remote cabin nestled in a picturesque valley, surrounded by lush woods and a gentle river. Everything seemed perfect. We arrived at the cabin and were immediately taken in by its rustic charm. It had the feel of a storybook cottage with a cozy fireplace and an enchanting view of the river. We settled in, and for the first few days, it was as if we found a piece of heaven on earth. On the third night, as the fireplace crackled and we cuddled on the couch, we heard it, a faint, eerie melody drifting in from outside. We couldn't place its source. It wasn't just music, it was a haunting tune that sent shivers down our spines. Sarah suggested we investigate, but I hesitated, believing it might be someone passing by. We decided to lock the cabin doors, just in case, and tried to dismiss the strange melody. Yet, it haunted us, growing louder and more unsettling as the night deepened. Around midnight, the music reached a crescendo, and Sarah couldn't take it any longer. She begged me to go outside and locate the source. I reluctantly agreed, grabbing a flashlight and heading into the chilling darkness. The moonlight illuminated the woods, casting eerie shadows. The music seemed to be coming from deeper in the forest. I followed the sound until I stumbled upon a dilapidated, moonlit chapel hidden among the trees. The haunting melody poured from within. I entered cautiously, my flashlight revealing a decrepit interior, tattered pews, and a flickering candle. An old piano stood in the corner, its keys moving as if played by invisible hands. The eerie sight sent a chill down my spine. The source of the music was clear, but its origin remained a mystery. I decided to investigate further. As I approached the piano, I heard a whispering voice, soft but distinct. "She's here with us now." Startled, I spun around, but no one was there. Panic washed over me, and I bolted back to the cabin, feeling pursued by unseen eyes. The melody continued, now trailing me. I burst through the cabin door, panting and terrified. Sarah was distraught, and I could barely form words to describe my encounter. As we sat huddled together, the music outside seemed to grow more frenzied. Our refuge turned into a nightmare as the haunting melody encircled us. Our pleas for help echoed unanswered. The nightmarish presence of the unseen musician haunted us, closing in with each passing moment. Suddenly, I turned to Sarah, her face pale, and whispered, "We need to leave now." We grabbed our belongings and hurried out into the forest, our hearts pounding, the eerie melody pursuing us through the trees. We ran for what felt like hours, trying to escape the haunting tune. Our love had been our refuge, but it now felt like a curse. In the distance, we spotted a group of people around a bonfire. Desperation made us approach, hoping for help. But as we drew closer, our hearts sank. The same chilling melody played as the group stood in a circle, swaying, their eyes vacant. We had walked into something inexplicable, a nightmare beyond our comprehension. We had no choice but to retrace our steps and return to the cabin, hoping to find a way to escape the haunting forest. As we entered the cabin, the music had stopped, and the eerie presence seemed to lift. But Sarah was no longer by my side. She was gone, vanished into thin air. Panic and sorrow consumed me. I searched the cabin, the woods, and called her name, but she was nowhere to be found. The following days were a blur of frantic searching and despair, but Sarah remained elusive. I was haunted by the memory of her terrified face, the whispering voices, and the unsettling melody that still echoed in my mind. The authorities were called, and an extensive search was launched, but Sarah had vanished without a trace. I was left with no answers, only a heart filled with grief and a mind haunted by that inexplicable night in the forest. The remote cabin that was meant to be our haven had become a place of torment and despair. Our romantic getaway had turned into a nightmare, and my wife's disappearance remained an unsolved mystery, forever haunting me. It was a long, lonely stretch of highway, the kind of road where your headlights carve through the darkness, and you feel like the only person in the world. I was on a road trip, taking some time off to explore the open road and clear my head. The radio was playing soft rock tunes, and the hum of the engine was the soundtrack to my journey. As I drove through the night, I spotted a figure on the side of the road, their thumb outstretched, hitchhiking. I had picked up hitchhikers before. I like to think I could spot the genuine ones from a distance. The guy looked harmless, maybe in his late 20s, with a scruffy beard and worn-out jeans. I pulled over, and he hopped into the passenger seat. "Thanks, man. I really appreciate it," he said, offering a friendly smile. His name was Jake, he said, and he was just trying to get to the next town. We started making small talk. He seemed polite and well-spoken, so I didn't think twice about giving him a lift. But as we chatted, I began to notice something off about Jake. He kept glancing at the glove compartment, as if expecting something to pop out at any moment. His smile began to feel less genuine, and a creeping unease settled in the pit of my stomach. After a while, he abruptly changed the subject. "You know, it's a lonely road out here. Anything can happen," he said, his voice taking on an eerie edge. I chuckled nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "Yeah, it can be pretty desolate. But that's part of the adventure, right?" Jake's response chilled me to the bone. "Adventure can be a dangerous thing," he muttered, his eyes flicking to the glove compartment again. I couldn't ignore the warning signs any longer. I had to get a sense of what was in that glove compartment that had him so fixated. With my heart pounding in my chest, I pretended to check my side mirror and subtly reached for the latch. That's when I saw it, a glint of cold steel. A knife, concealed within the glove compartment. Panic surged through me. I knew I had to act fast. "Hey, Jake, I need to pull over for a moment," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I glanced at the deserted stretch of road around us, no other cars in sight. My heart raced as I eased the car to the side of the road. "What's the matter?" Jake asked, suspicion in his eyes. As the car slowed, I made my move. I slammed on the brakes and, before he could react, lunged for the glove compartment. I grabbed the knife, panic and adrenaline pumping through my veins. Jake fought back, but I managed to push him away and scramble out of the car, clutching the weapon. I stood on the side of the highway, gasping for breath, while Jake sat in the passenger seat, his eyes wild with fury. He had been planning something terrible, that much was clear. But now he was trapped, and I held the weapon. "Get out of the car, now!" I shouted, and he complied, stumbling out onto the roadside. I called the police, who arrived quickly and arrested Jake. It turned out he had a record of violence and had been on the run from the law. I shuddered to think what might have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts and taken action. That night, I continued my road trip, shaken but grateful to be alive. I'll never forget that ill-fated road trip with my friends, the one that transformed an adventure into a waking nightmare. It all began when we decided to embark on a cross-country journey, fueled by wanderlust and a desire to escape our mundane lives. We were 5 in total: Alex, Betty, Mark, Lisa, and myself, just ordinary folks yearning for adventure. Little did we know what we were about to face. We set off with excitement, the open road stretching before us like a ribbon of possibility. We had an old map and a vague idea of our route, but as the days passed, it became apparent that we were tracing a path that had a dark history. It was a path once trodden by a notorious serial killer, a murderer who had left a trail of blood and terror decades ago. At first, we encountered stories from locals haunting tales of the killer's deeds, the fear that still lingered in their eyes. We laughed it off as morbid fascination, never taking those warnings seriously. But soon, strange things started to happen. In one small town, we pulled into a rundown motel for the night. As we entered the dimly lit lobby, the receptionist eyed us nervously. She asked if we were planning to stay long, if we knew where we were headed. We thought it was just small-town eccentricity. The first night passed uneventfully. But by the second night, we were woken by eerie sounds outside our rooms, hushed whispers and rustling leaves. We dismissed it as the wind, trying to silence our rising unease. The following day, our route took us to a decaying, abandoned farmhouse. It was an unsettling sight, a place that seemed untouched by time. As we explored, I noticed strange markings on the walls, cryptic symbols etched into the wood. Mark laughed it off as the work of local vandals. But it wasn't long before Lisa found an old newspaper clippings under a dusty floorboard. It was a collection of articles detailing the serial killer's gruesome crimes, his victims, the methods, the places. As the stories unfurled, we realized with mounting dread that our path was inextricably linked to his. We tried to backtrack, but something was amiss. The further we traveled, the less control we had over our route. Our GPS malfunctioned, and signs seemed to change direction on their own. Panic set in as we became trapped in a labyrinth of desolation, with no escape from the dark past haunting us. Late one night, our car broke down on a remote stretch of road. Desperation led us to seek shelter in a dilapidated house that seemed like the last refuge. But as we explored the crumbling interior, we discovered something that sent chills down our spines, a hidden room with faded photographs adorning the walls. The photos depicted a family, ordinary and innocent, bound and terrified. It was then that we heard the sound of a sinister, chilling laugh echoing through the house. And there, emerging from the shadows, was a man, his eyes devoid of humanity, a grin that sent terror coursing through our veins. It was the serial killer, alive and well, hiding in plain sight all these years. We ran, fear propelling us through the darkened house, our hearts racing. But he was relentless, and the chase through the night was a nightmare of agony and despair. We stumbled into his twisted lair, a place adorned with the mementos of his grisly deeds. It was there that we found the previous occupants of the hidden room lifeless, grotesque remnants of his past. We couldn't hold back our screams as we fled from the house of horrors. We ran until exhaustion overcame us, seeking refuge in a seemingly deserted town. We had a singular goal: to find the police and bring an end to the nightmare. But this town was different, silent and devoid of life. As we ventured deeper, we realized it was a ghost town, with a dark secret concealed within its forgotten streets. Finally, as our group dwindled to only a few, we stumbled upon the remnants of the local police station. But even there, the lingering presence of the serial killer was inescapable. We found an old case file, his crimes, the victims, and a chilling confession penned in a cold, calculated hand. We knew then that we had to flee, to escape this place and the horror it held. But the town had become a maze of despair, and as the shadows lengthened, we felt his presence closing in. We made one final attempt to leave that cursed town, racing through the empty streets in a car we'd found. But the killer was always one step ahead, as if the very town conspired with him. Our escape was blocked by a barricade of abandoned vehicles, and there he stood, grinning, the embodiment of evil. In the end, it was Mark who faced the killer, buying us precious seconds. As we fled through the woods, his shouts and the echoing gunshot marked the end of our horrific journey. We finally found help, and the police descended upon that nightmarish town. The serial killer had vanished, but our account of the horrors we'd witnessed led to a renewed manhunt. Back in 2015, my friend Jamie and I decided to embark on a backpacking adventure through Europe. We heard about this small, forgotten village nestled deep in the Romanian Carpathian Mountains. The place was called Vasilor, and rumors suggested it had been abandoned for years. Curiosity drove us to include it in our itinerary. Our journey led us through winding mountain roads, and eventually, we stumbled upon the outskirts of the village. The sight that greeted us was eerie: cottages, overgrown gardens, and cobblestone streets that seemed untouched by time. The air was heavy with silence, and a thick mist clung to the landscape. Excitement mingled with unease as we ventured further into Vasilor. No sooner had we taken a few steps than we felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. It was as though unseen eyes followed our every move. But we shrugged it off, thinking our imagination was getting the best of us. We explored an old church first, its interior filled with ancient, religious relics. Jamie decided to snap a photo when he suddenly froze, staring at the camera screen. "Look at this," he muttered, showing me the image. In the photo, amidst the religious icons, there was a blurry figure, a villager who seemed out of place, seemingly staring right at us. We decided to continue, pressing further into the village. As we approached a decaying, two-story house, we heard a distant, melodic chant. The sound grew louder, and we realized it was coming from the village square, where a group of villagers had gathered. What struck us as odd was the way they seemed to be celebrating, though the village appeared deserted when we arrived. Their clothes, a strange blend of old and new, made them look like they had stepped out of the past. The tension was palpable as we hesitated about whether to approach the group. Their faces were obscured, a sea of white masks with crude, smiley expressions. The unnerving chants grew louder, and our sense of dread deepened. Before we could make a decision, one of the villagers noticed us and pointed us out to the others. A chill ran down my spine as they turned their collective attention toward us. Their expressions remained concealed by the sinister masks, but their movements conveyed a malevolent intent. We didn't wait to see what they had in mind, bolting back towards the church. The villagers pursued us with alarming speed and stamina. Our hearts pounded as we raced through the streets, and it became apparent that these seemingly ordinary villagers were far from harmless. They were gaining on us, and there was no choice but to hide. We ducked into an abandoned cottage, barricading ourselves behind the creaking wooden door. It didn't take long for the villagers to discover our hiding spot, and soon they were banging on the door with an eerie determination. It was a harrowing standoff, and I was grateful for the sturdy old wood keeping them at bay. However, it was only a matter of time before they overcame our barricade. Jamie and I knew we needed a plan, and fast. As we brainstormed, a crash echoed from outside, and the banging stopped. We exchanged bewildered glances and decided to risk a peek. What we saw was astonishing. Another group of people, armed with sticks and rocks, had come to our aid. They fought off the menacing villagers, giving us the chance to escape. We sprinted out of the cottage and joined our unexpected saviors. Their leader, an elderly woman with a stern but kind face, explained that the villagers of Vassalor were dangerous, hiding in plain sight for generations. They revealed that the place wasn't abandoned, but that it was occupied by a secretive cult who lured curious tourists like us. With the help of our new allies, we managed to escape the clutches of the villagers and find our way back to safety. It was a heart-pounding ordeal that haunted our memories long after we left Vassalor. The experience in that supposedly abandoned village had shaken us to our core, teaching us the true meaning of fear. It was a nightmare come to life, and it made us appreciate the safety of the world outside its sinister cobblestone streets. Jamie and I never stopped wondering about the secrets of Vassalor, but one thing was certain: we had no intention of ever returning to those haunted mountains. Our adventure had changed us, leaving an indelible mark on our souls and a chilling story to share. Let me tell you about the time I found myself in a real-life nightmare. It was a few years ago when I decided to join a hiking group for a weekend trek into the wilderness. A friend had convinced me it would be a great adventure, a chance to connect with nature, but little did I know how harrowing the experience would become. Our group consisted of 10 individuals, a mix of experienced and novice hikers, each with their own reasons for being there. The journey began on a sunny morning, the air crisp, and the forest promising excitement. We followed our trail through the dense woods, surrounded by towering trees, their branches casting eerie, elongated shadows. As the day progressed, our hike went smoothly. We took in the breathtaking landscapes, crossed bubbling streams, and basked in the tranquility of nature. However, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the serene wilderness transformed into a sinister realm. That's when we realized we were lost. Panic slowly crept in as the dense foliage swallowed our trail, and the dwindling light intensified our isolation. A sense of unease settled upon the group like a shroud. We had a basic map and compass, but it felt inadequate in the face of the vast and unfamiliar wilderness that surrounded us. We debated whether to backtrack or continue forward in hopes of rejoining the trail. Arguments ensued as tensions rose. The chilling night air only made matters worse, and the looming uncertainty hung heavily over us. Fear began to take hold. One of our members, Sarah, had a breakdown. She'd always been the anxious type, and the situation had pushed her to her limits. Her sobs were like a somber soundtrack to our growing desperation. We tried to console her, but it was clear that we were all on edge. As hours turned into days, our group dynamic deteriorated. We became increasingly irrational, accusing each other of leading us astray and making reckless decisions. The shadows in the forest seemed to play tricks on our minds. Every rustling leaf, snapping twig, or distant animal cry amplified our paranoia. Food supplies dwindled quickly, and we were forced to rely on the meager resources we could scrounge from the forest. Foraging became a daily task, our stomachs grumbling with hunger and desperation. The constant gnawing of our empty bellies only intensified our growing sense of hopelessness. The worst part was the nights. We huddled together for warmth and security, but sleep was a luxury we couldn't afford. Every little sound, whether it was the wind through the trees, an animal in the distance, or simply the sound of our fellow hikers shifting, sent shivers down our spines. The darkness of the woods held unknown terrors. Within a week, our group had dwindled from 10 to 5. 2 of our members had decided to strike out on their own, convinced that they could find their way back to civilization. We never saw them again. And then there were the whispers in the night. Muffled voices carried through the trees, as if the forest itself was conspiring against us. Some claimed it was just the wind, but others believed we were being watched, or worse. Despite our differences, we knew we had to stick together. We needed each other to survive, but our fraying nerves and growing paranoia threatened to tear us apart. It was a nightmare, a relentless battle for survival that pushed us to the brink. Eventually, we stumbled upon a road, a lifeline back to the world we'd left behind. Exhausted, emaciated, and traumatized, we flagged down a passing car and were finally rescued from the clutches of the forest. The nightmare of those weeks still haunts me. I can't forget the desperation in the eyes of my fellow hikers, the hunger that gnawed at our insides, or the fear that consumed us. It was a stark reminder of the darkness that resides in each of us, and how it can be amplified in the face of true terror. So, if you ever find yourself wandering into the wilderness, be prepared for the unexpected, because nature can be a cruel and unforgiving force. It can push you to your limits and reveal the darkest corners of your soul. And when that happens, the line between friend and foe can blur in the relentless fight for survival. A few summers ago, my family and I decided to take a caravan holiday. We heard about a quiet, picturesque site nestled in a remote, wooded area. It was the perfect place for a peaceful escape from the hustle and bustle of city life, or so we thought. Upon arriving, we were charmed by the serenity of the site. Tall, ancient trees encircled the area, casting dappled shadows on the well-maintained caravans and RVs. A tranquil river glistened nearby, and the entire setting seemed idyllic. However, on our second day, our peaceful getaway took a sinister turn. It was an overcast morning when I first noticed him, a tall, gaunt man with a scruffy beard and tattered clothes. He seemed out of place among the holidaymakers, who were mostly families and retirees. He didn't have a caravan or a tent, and he appeared to be loitering around the site. Over the next few days, his presence became increasingly disturbing. He'd watch my children as they played by the river, a sinister glint in his eye. I brought this to the attention of my wife, and we decided to keep a closer watch on our kids. But it didn't end there. On the 4th evening, as darkness fell and a chilling wind swept through the trees, we were sitting around a campfire, trying to ward off the encroaching cold. That's when the stranger approached us, uninvited. His presence loomed over us as he asked if we had any food to spare. His voice was a raspy, disquieting whisper that sent shivers down my spine. We offered him some leftover hot dogs, hoping to get rid of him, but he refused and continued to stand too close for comfort. The atmosphere around the campfire grew tense. I could see fear in my children's eyes as they clung to my wife. The stranger seemed oblivious to our discomfort, as if he enjoyed the unease he was causing. After several more minutes of awkward silence, he finally retreated into the shadows, leaving us bewildered and deeply unsettled. That night, I decided to discreetly ask some of our fellow campers if they had any encounters with the man. It turned out that they had each story more unsettling than the last. He'd shown up uninvited at family picnics, loitered near the children's play area, and made eerie comments that left everyone feeling vulnerable and fearful. Our once serene getaway had become a nightmare. We were all living in a state of perpetual unease, constantly on guard against the man's unsettling presence. I couldn't understand why the site management hadn't done anything to address the situation, but we were hesitant to involve the police without concrete evidence of wrongdoing. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the woods around us grew dark, our worst fears were realized. The stranger approached our caravan, lurking just outside. I watched him through the window, beads of sweat forming on my brow. This time, there was no subtlety to his actions. He pounded on the door, his face twisted into an unsettling grin. We huddled inside, my family trembling with fear. The stranger's insistent knocking echoed through the quiet night. I made the decision to call the police, my voice shaking as I recounted the unsettling encounters we'd had with the man. It felt like an eternity before the police arrived. In the end, they didn't find the stranger, but they assured us that they would patrol the site more frequently. We were skeptical of their ability to catch the man, given his elusiveness, but the increased police presence did offer some semblance of security. The remainder of our holiday was tainted by the sense of dread that had taken hold. We never saw the stranger again, but the trauma of those days haunted us long after we'd left the caravan site. That experience was a stark reminder that real horror isn't just confined to the realms of fiction. It can intrude upon your life when you least expect it, turning a peaceful holiday into a chilling ordeal. We eventually tried to put the encounter behind us, but the memory of that sinister stranger still sends shivers down my spine. It was the start of my much-awaited vacation. I had boarded the flight, eager for some time away from the daily grind. Little did I know that this journey would turn into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. I found my seat, an aisle seat, and settled in. To my right was an unassuming man, seemingly in his early 40s. He appeared ordinary, but I would soon learn that appearances can be deceiving. As the flight took off and we reached cruising altitude, my neighbor struck up a conversation. At first, it was harmless chit-chat about the weather and travel. But as we got deeper into the flight, the man's demeanor changed. He began to share unsettling stories of his past, tales that sent a chill down my spine. He spoke with a detached, almost gleeful tone, as if recounting a series of horror stories. He told me about how he had once worked in a morgue, relishing the details of gruesome autopsies he'd witnessed. I tried to dismiss it as a twisted sense of humor or a morbid fascination, but it didn't stop there. His stories grew progressively darker. The man recounted encounters with dangerous criminals he claimed to have known personally, describing heinous acts they had committed. His eyes gleamed with a disturbing excitement as he spoke of violence, torture, and criminal connections. I couldn't tell if he was weaving a web of lies or revealing some terrifying truths. As the hours passed, he delved into even more unsettling territory, sharing his own experiences with criminal activities. He casually mentioned a bank robbery he had allegedly participated in, describing the heist with an unnerving level of detail. I couldn't help but wonder if I was sitting next to a dangerous criminal. My heart raced as I realized the plane was still in the air, and we were trapped in this confined space together. I didn't want to provoke him or draw attention, so I nodded and offered non-committal responses, hoping he would lose interest. But it was as if he couldn't contain his urge to share his chilling experiences. He revealed that he had once been involved with a gang, participating in violent acts that left me horrified. I began to fear for my safety as I sat next to this man who seemed to revel in the darkest corners of human behavior. I couldn't bring myself to alert the flight attendants or ask for help, as his stories grew increasingly grotesque and disturbing. My imagination ran wild, and I couldn't shake the fear that he might be armed or have associates on the plane. Hours dragged on, and I was trapped in this terrifying encounter. I was unsure if these stories were pure fabrication or if this man was a genuine menace. The only solace I found was the thought that the flight would eventually land, and I could escape this living nightmare. Finally, the plane touched down, and I wasted no time in distancing myself from the man. I hurried off the aircraft and tried to put the encounter behind me, but the haunting stories and the sinister presence of that man stayed with me, casting a shadow over what was supposed to be a relaxing vacation. A week of sun, sand, and relaxation at a beautiful beach resort was much needed. We had rented a cozy beachfront cottage, the kids were ecstatic, and my husband and I were looking forward to some quality time together. Little did I know that this trip would turn into a nightmare I'd never forget. Our first few days were filled with laughter, building sandcastles, and taking long walks along the shore. But on the fourth day, something changed. I noticed a man, a complete stranger, lingering nearby. He was tall, with a disheveled appearance that set off warning bells in my head. He wore a baseball cap pulled low, making it hard to see his face clearly. At first, I dismissed it as mere coincidence, thinking he might be another vacationer exploring the area. But as the days went by, his presence became increasingly unsettling. No matter where we went, a visit to the local market, a trip to the ice cream parlor, or a stroll on the beach, he was always there, lurking in the background. I grew uneasy as I noticed his gaze fixed on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being relentlessly pursued. My husband reassured me, saying it was all in my head, but I knew something was amiss. I began to avoid leaving the cottage unless absolutely necessary, fearing that I would run into him again. One evening, as the sun set, casting a warm, golden glow over the beach, my husband suggested a romantic walk along the shoreline. Reluctantly, I agreed. I hoped it would help me relax and escape the eerie feeling that had gripped me. We walked hand in hand, but the unease didn't fade. My eyes darted around, scanning the surroundings, searching for that unsettling figure. As we strolled, I spotted him at a distance, still wearing the cap pulled low. My heart pounded, and I could feel the tension mounting. I told my husband about the man I'd been noticing for days, and he finally looked in the stranger's direction. My husband's face grew serious as he turned to me, acknowledging my concerns. We decided to head back to the cottage, and I could feel my pulse quicken with each step. As we approached the cottage, my fears were realized. The stranger was getting closer, still maintaining a discreet distance, but with every step, his presence felt more ominous. My husband, a protective and level-headed man, decided we should confront the stranger and address the situation directly. As we turned around to speak to him, we found ourselves face to face with the man in the cap. He was standing in our path, an unsettling grin on his face. My husband demanded to know who he was and why he had been following us. The man's grin widened, sending shivers down my spine. He spoke in a soft, sinister tone, revealing that he had been watching me for days and was captivated by my presence. He professed an obsession that made my skin crawl, telling us he had no intentions of leaving. Terror surged through me, and my husband's protective instincts flared. He tried to reason with the man, insisting that he was causing distress to our family and that he needed to leave us alone. But the stranger's fixation only seemed to intensify. As the confrontation escalated, the stranger's demeanor shifted from sinister to outright menacing. He became confrontational, making threats that sent a shiver of dread down my spine. My husband, realizing the potential danger, attempted to steer me away from this unpredictable man, urging me to go back to the cottage while he dealt with the situation. My heart was heavy with fear as I retreated, leaving my husband to face the relentless stranger alone. I watched from a distance, hidden from sight but unable to turn away. The man's demeanor grew more erratic, and my husband's attempts to reason with him were met with an unsettling mix of aggression and fixation. I realized we were dealing with someone who was not merely a vacationer with an unusual interest. This man was unhinged, his relentless pursuit fueled by a sinister obsession that had placed our family in jeopardy. Tears welled in my eyes as I fumbled to dial the resort's security line, desperately requesting assistance. Fear gnawed at my insides, and I could only pray that help would arrive in time. As the minutes dragged on, my husband and the relentless stranger remained locked in a chilling confrontation. When resort security finally arrived, they swiftly detained the man, leading him away in handcuffs. My husband returned to me, his face pale and his hands trembling. The relief was palpable, but our vacation had been irrevocably tainted by this nightmarish encounter. As we returned to our cottage, the gravity of the situation sunk in. We would never forget the relentless stranger with the sinister fixation who had transformed our dream vacation into a living nightmare. It was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, exploring the lush rainforests of Central America. My girlfriend, Emily, and I had spent months planning this trip, and we were eager to immerse ourselves in the beauty of the jungle. To make the most of our experience, we decided to hire a local tour guide, who came highly recommended by fellow travelers. Our guide, Antonio, had a charismatic charm about him that put us at ease from the start. He claimed to be a seasoned expert with years of experience navigating the jungle. His stories of thrilling encounters with wildlife and his knowledge of the rainforest's flora and fauna were mesmerizing. As we ventured deeper into the heart of the jungle, I couldn't help but notice something odd. Antonio's stories and descriptions of the surroundings didn't seem to match what I'd read in guidebooks and heard from other tourists. Emily shared my suspicions but urged me to give him the benefit of the doubt. Day by day, Antonio's tales grew increasingly grandiose. He claimed to have discovered hidden waterfalls and encountered elusive wildlife that no other guide had ever seen. My unease deepened as we ventured farther into the jungle, far from any familiar trails or signs of civilization. One evening, as we gathered around the campfire, a fellow traveler mentioned that Antonio's name didn't seem to match any reputable guides in the area. A feeling of dread washed over me as I realized that Antonio's history and credentials might be fabricated. I knew I had to investigate further. Late one night, while Emily and the other tourists were asleep, I discreetly borrowed Antonio's backpack. Inside, I found a hidden journal containing notes and maps of our journey. But what shook me to my core were pages detailing Antonio's past, filled with criminal records and allegations of fraud. He was no seasoned guide, he was a con artist. I returned the journal to its hiding place, my heart racing with the realization that our lives were in danger. I had no doubt that Antonio's true intentions were far from those of a tour guide. I decided to share my findings with Emily and the other tourists the following morning. The truth about Antonio's deception shocked everyone, but the urgency of the situation became apparent. We knew that if we confronted him, he might react violently. The group decided to come up with a plan to escape his clutches without raising suspicion. Our chance came when Antonio suggested a hike to a remote location known for its stunning views. We couldn't risk going with him, so we feigned illness and told him we'd catch up later. He agreed to the arrangement, and we watched as he led the rest of the group away. We waited for a few hours, then packed our essentials and headed in the opposite direction. It was a harrowing trek through the dense jungle, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Antonio might return and pursue us. Our lives depended on staying ahead of the man who had deceived us for days. We eventually found a remote village and sought help from the locals, who listened to our story and offered their assistance. They provided us with safe passage to the nearest town, where we could finally escape Antonio's clutches. The relief was palpable, but we couldn't forget the nightmare we had narrowly avoided. As we returned to our normal lives, the memory of our terrifying encounter with a fraudulent tour guide continued to haunt us. Our pursuit of adventure had led us into a perilous situation, and the rainforest's lush beauty had concealed the chilling deception of a man who nearly became the cause of our demise. Vacations are usually a time for relaxation, but my recent trip to a tropical paradise turned into a chilling encounter I'll never forget. I'd always been fascinated by shipwrecks, so when I saw the opportunity to book a diving experience to explore one off the coast, I jumped at the chance. Little did I know that this adventure would become a nightmarish descent into the depths of human greed. As I arrived at the dive center, I was greeted by our diving instructor, Sarah, who seemed friendly and experienced. A small group of us had signed up for the dive, and we were all excited about the prospect of uncovering hidden treasures from the ocean's depths. The shipwreck was said to be a rich source of historical artifacts, and rumors had it that it might even contain a lost chest of gold. The dive began like any other, with breathtaking coral reefs and colorful marine life to explore. We descended deeper, and as the shipwreck came into view, I couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement. The old vessel lay in eerie silence, its masts tangled with seaweed, a haunting relic of the past. Our group carefully explored the ship's interior, discovering rusted cannons, pottery, and other remnants of its cargo. It was as thrilling as I'd hoped, and I couldn't have been happier. That is until we stumbled upon a cache of artifacts unlike anything I'd ever seen. The rumors of gold suddenly seemed all too real as we found a chest filled with ornate, glistening trinkets. Before we could react, a series of lights emerged from the gloom. Our flashlights revealed a rival group of divers, led by a menacing figure named Marco. He was a tall, menacing man with a dangerous glint in his eyes. Marco and his team claimed ownership of the shipwreck and accused us of trespassing. Panic set in as we realized we were caught in a deadly game. Marco was driven by an obsession to claim the treasure for himself, and he'd stop at nothing to achieve his goal. We tried to reason with him, explaining that we were there for a legitimate dive, but he was unyielding, his threats growing more chilling by the minute. As tensions escalated, I felt the cold, oppressive water closing in around us. Marco's group had us outnumbered, and it was clear that they were willing to use force to take the treasure. We were trapped in a life and death struggle, miles below the surface, with no one to hear our cries for help. The atmosphere grew increasingly suffocating as we fought to protect the treasure we'd found. Our dive had transformed into a nightmare, a desperate fight to survive. Sarah, our diving instructor, displayed incredible courage as she helped us defend ourselves against the ruthless rival treasure hunters. But the odds were against us, and I couldn't help but wonder if we'd ever see the surface again. As time passed, the stalemate continued. Marco's group was determined, but we were equally resolute. A sinister dance of threats and counter-threats unfolded in the eerie silence of the deep ocean. We knew that one wrong move could cost us our lives. Hours felt like days as we clung to our discovery, desperate to escape the clutches of our adversaries. The reality of our situation was inescapable. We were stranded in a life and death struggle, with darkness and danger lurking in the watery depths. Our dive had turned into a chilling game of survival, and the weight of the ocean above pressed down on us with relentless menace. With the situation growing increasingly dire, our group began to contemplate an escape plan. We realized that our best chance was to make a break for it, ascending toward the surface while Marco and his team remained focused on the treasure. It was a dangerous gambit, and we had to act quickly. When the moment came, we made our move. Sarah led us in a dash for the surface, our hearts pounding with a mix of fear and hope. The ascent was fraught with danger, and we knew that we were leaving the treasure behind, but our lives were more precious. Gasping for air, we broke the surface, leaving the haunting shipwreck and the chilling depths behind. Our escape had been a desperate gamble, but we had emerged with our lives intact. Our dive had transformed from a dream of adventure into a nightmarish struggle for survival. In the end, we reported our encounter to the authorities, but Marco and his crew managed to elude capture. They disappeared back into the depths, leaving us with the chilling memory of our deadly game in the deep blue sea. The dream of uncovering treasure had led us to a terrifying ordeal that still haunts our thoughts, a chilling encounter with ruthless rivals in the unforgiving realm of the ocean's depths. Our family had been eagerly looking forward to a well-deserved vacation, and we booked a lovely vacation rental property on Airbnb. The online pictures showcased a charming, idyllic cottage in a remote forest setting. The idea was to spend quality time together, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Little did we know that our getaway would soon turn into a chilling encounter that would shatter our sense of security. Upon our arrival, the host, a seemingly friendly gentleman named Mr. Rowland, warmly greeted us and gave us a tour of the property. He was overly attentive, his piercing eyes tracking our every movement. We brushed off our unease as mere jitters from being in an unfamiliar place. However, as the hours passed, our discomfort grew. We couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Rowland was watching us, even inside the cottage. Late at night, we heard faint noises that sounded like footsteps outside. Our hearts raced as we peered through the windows, but there was no one in sight. We convinced ourselves that it was merely the forest playing tricks on us, but an ominous tension had taken hold of our family. The next day, as we set out to explore the nearby woods, I noticed something strange. Mr. Rowland seemed to know about our plans before we'd even mentioned them. He casually inquired about our day and even mentioned specific trails we discussed privately. It sent shivers down my spine, but I tried to rationalize it as mere coincidence. Our second night at the cottage took a sinister turn. As we sat by the fireplace, a loud, chilling whisper echoed through the cottage, "I can see you." Our family huddled together in terror, trying to locate the source of the eerie voice. The words repeated, each time closer and more malevolent. Panicked, we decided to leave the cottage and find a nearby hotel. We were convinced that Mr. Rowland was behind these disturbing events, and we couldn't stay another minute. Our escape was a nerve-wracking ordeal, as the chilling whispers pursued us into the night. At the hotel, we reported our disturbing experiences to the local authorities, who agreed to investigate. Our relief was short-lived, though, as the authorities discovered a hidden network of surveillance cameras planted throughout the cottage. It was clear that Mr. Rowland had been spying on us, documenting our every move. With the evidence in hand, the authorities confronted Mr. Rowland, who was taken into custody. His chilling intentions came to light as it was revealed that he had sinister plans for our family. We had narrowly escaped a terrifying fate, but the realization that we had been unwittingly watched, our privacy violated, haunted us. The nightmare wasn't over, as we soon learned that Mr. Rowland had done the same to previous guests. The depths of his malice were unsettling, and his obsession with watching and manipulating his renters was the stuff of nightmares. In the end, we were fortunate to have escaped our ordeal relatively unscathed, but the experience left an indelible mark on our family. It served as a chilling reminder that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places, turning what should have been a peaceful vacation into a terrifying encounter that still haunts our memories. The idyllic cottage had become a house of horrors, and we had barely escaped its chilling grip. It was supposed to be an adventure, a thrilling experience in the vast, isolated desert of Nevada. I joined a guided tour along with a group of strangers, all eager to explore the rugged beauty of the desert landscape. We were told it would be an unforgettable journey, but what awaited us was beyond anything we could have imagined. The tour operator, a weathered man named Jack, had painted a vivid picture of the desert's mysteries and the history that lay hidden beneath its arid surface. As we ventured deeper into the desolation, Jack's stories about the area's unsolved disappearances, lost hikers, and the eerie legends surrounding it sent shivers down our spines. It started as an ordinary tour. We marveled at the breathtaking landscapes, traversed winding trails, and listened intently as Jack recounted the desert stories. But as the hours passed, I began to notice something unsettling. Jack's stories grew darker, and his demeanor shifted. He became erratic, his eyes filled with a wild gleam, as if something had possessed him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging us into a moonlit desert expanse. Our unease deepened. Jack's behavior grew increasingly erratic, and he began to speak incoherently, muttering about the desert's secrets and the whispers that only he could hear. Panic spread among our group. Then, without warning, Jack took off into the desert, leaving us stranded in the heart of nowhere. Our cell phones were useless, there was no signal, and the remote location left us with no other choice but to stick together and find a way out. Fear gnawed at us as the desert's isolation became palpable, and we knew our survival depended on our ability to navigate this harsh, unforgiving terrain. With no sign of help, we decided to follow our instincts and the direction we believed would lead us to safety. It wasn't long before the temperature dropped, and the frigid desert night began to set in. Our group huddled together, our only source of light a fading flashlight. We trudged through the endless dunes, our path illuminated by the silvery glow of the moon. Every rustling bush or distant coyote's howl sent a shiver through us. Our anxiety was compounded by the realization that Jack might be out there, watching and waiting, his intentions a chilling mystery. Hours turned into days as we battled dehydration, fatigue, and the relentless desert sun. There was no sign of civilization, and our supplies dwindled rapidly. Desperation settled in as we pushed forward, guided only by a faint sense of direction and a shared will to survive. Eventually, we stumbled upon a forsaken campsite, its abandoned tents and debris telling a story of tragedy and despair. We had no choice but to scavenge for any supplies we could find, our fears growing that we were treading on the same path as the unfortunate souls who had vanished in this desolate land. As the days turned into nights, we braved the biting cold and scorching heat, struggling to maintain hope. We formed a tight-knit bond, our determination the only thing that kept us moving forward. And then, just when we thought our ordeal couldn't get any worse, a vicious sandstorm swept through the desert, disorienting us further and threatening to bury us alive. Survival became a primal instinct. We collected rainwater from makeshift containers, rationed our remaining food, and maintained a constant lookout for any sign of rescue. The sense of isolation and vulnerability in the merciless desert was enough to drive anyone to the brink of madness. Miraculously, after days of navigating the treacherous terrain, we finally spotted a distant road. Our hearts soared with hope. We emerged from the desert, battered, dehydrated, and changed forever by the horrors we'd experienced. We learned later that Jack, the deranged tour operator, was never found. His fate remained a chilling enigma. As we left the desolate desert behind, we knew that the bonds formed during our nightmare in the wilderness were the only things that had kept us alive. The vast, isolated desert had nearly consumed us, but we had managed to claw our way out of its clutches, forever scarred by the horrors we'd encountered in that nightmarish place. It was supposed to be a memorable family vacation, a chance to capture precious moments together. We had chosen a picturesque coastal town for our getaway, and I decided to hire a local photographer to document our vacation. Little did we know, our picturesque retreat would turn into a nightmare beyond our darkest fears. The photographer, Richard, had come recommended by the hotel staff. He appeared as an amiable, middle-aged man, well-dressed and punctual. We felt at ease as we embarked on our first day of the photo shoot. We started with the scenic beach, the sun casting a golden glow on the pristine sand. Richard was skillful, capturing the natural beauty of the location along with candid shots of our family. As the day progressed, however, his demeanor began to shift. He would frequently steer us into more secluded spots, suggesting we venture deeper into the rugged landscape. At first, it seemed like he was aiming for unique, off-the-beaten-path shots. But something in the way he looked at us, particularly my wife and children, sent shivers down my spine. On the second day of the photo shoot, we headed to a dense forest area. It was there that Richard's behavior took an unsettling turn. He insisted on taking photos of my wife and kids alone, suggesting it would add an intimate touch to the album. I reluctantly agreed, watching from a distance as he photographed them. As my family posed near a serene pond, my apprehension grew. I noticed that Richard was becoming increasingly obsessive about capturing my wife's and children's faces, zooming in on them and giving them peculiar instructions for the perfect shot. His actions began to raise alarm bells. When he urged my family to move further into the forest, my parental instincts kicked into overdrive. I confronted Richard, telling him that we had enough pictures and wanted to return to the safety of our hotel. He reluctantly agreed, but his smile had transformed into a sinister grin that made my blood run cold. That night, I couldn't shake off the unsettling feeling Richard's actions had left me with. I decided to do some research on him, and what I discovered chilled me to the bone. There were several complaints about him online, but the most disturbing revelation was a news article from a few years ago. It reported that a local photographer with the same name had been involved in the disappearance of a family during a photo shoot. The next day, I told my wife about my findings, and we decided to confront Richard and cut our ties with him. When we met with him, he seemed unnaturally calm and pretended not to know about the accusations against him. The tension in the air was palpable as we explained that we wanted to end the photo shoot immediately. As we turned to leave, I couldn't help but glance back, and there, in his expression, I saw the true darkness that lay beneath the facade. It was then that we knew we needed to get away from Richard as soon as possible. We packed our things and left the coastal town that very day. Back home, we reported our experiences to the local authorities and shared the information I had found online. Investigations into Richard's background were reopened, and it was discovered that he had indeed been involved in the earlier disappearance, but he had managed to evade the law due to lack of evidence. Our family had narrowly escaped a potentially terrifying ordeal, but the realization that we had been in the presence of someone with malicious intentions was haunting. We couldn't help but wonder how many others have fallen victim to the photographer's sinister desires. Our picturesque vacation had turned into a nightmare, a stark reminder that danger can lurk beneath even the most idyllic settings. We had walked away from the precipice of a horrifying encounter, forever changed by the experience. It was supposed to be a tranquil family vacation in a quaint coastal town. The sun-kissed beaches and charming atmosphere promised a perfect getaway. But as we settled into a rented cottage, a sense of unease began to creep over us. It wasn't the picturesque surroundings that troubled us, it was the locals. The town's inhabitants appeared friendly enough on the surface, offering warm smiles and greetings. Yet, something about their interactions felt forced, almost rehearsed. We chalked it up to being outsiders and continued exploring the town. On our first evening, we decided to dine at a local restaurant. The atmosphere was cozy, and the menu promised delicious seafood. As we settled at our table, I couldn't help but notice the hushed whispers and curious glances directed our way. It was as if the entire restaurant had stopped to watch our every move. When our food arrived, we could hardly focus on the meal. The locals' eyes remained fixed on us, their murmured conversations growing more intense. The unease in the restaurant was palpable, and it felt as if we were unwelcome guests in our own vacation destination. We decided to cut our dinner short and left the restaurant. As we strolled back to our cottage, we couldn't shake the eerie feeling that we were being watched. The streets had grown unusually deserted, and an unsettling silence hung in the air. That night, as we lay in our beds, we couldn't sleep. Strange noises echoed outside our cottage. It sounded like a group of people whispering and mumbling in a language we couldn't understand. We were gripped by fear, clutching each other, trying to reassure our children that everything was okay. The following morning, the atmosphere in the town had become even more chilling. Shopkeepers would stop talking when we entered their stores, and children playing in the streets would fall silent as we passed by. It was as if the entire town had conspired to shroud us in a cloak of dread. We decided to seek help from the local authorities. The police station was our first stop, but we were met with indifference and vague reassurances. They dismissed our concerns, telling us it was a quiet town and that we had nothing to worry about. But their hollow smiles and evasive answers only intensified our paranoia. Back at our cottage, we locked the doors and windows, unable to shake the fear that we were not alone in the town. The whispering voices returned that night, growing louder and more insistent. The unsettling sounds surrounded our cottage, causing our children to cry in terror. Desperation led us to pack our belongings in the middle of the night. We had to escape this place, this town that seemed to harbor some dark, hidden secret. As we loaded the car, we could see shadowy figures watching us from the darkness. Their eyes bore into us, devoid of any warmth or humanity. The engine roared to life, and we sped away from the nightmarish town, leaving behind the dreadful memories that had tainted our once promising vacation. We didn't stop until we had reached the safety of a bustling city, far from the eerie coastal town and its ominous residents. To this day, we are haunted by the chilling experiences of that vacation, unable to comprehend the enigmatic and malevolent atmosphere that had engulfed the seemingly idyllic destination. Our family was forever changed by that encounter, forever wary of the darkness that can lurk beneath the most picturesque of settings. A few years back, my wife and I decided to take a vacation to a remote cabin nestled deep within the woods. The promise of isolation and tranquility was what drew us to that picturesque location. We longed for an escape from the bustle of daily life and the chance to reconnect with nature. Little did we know that the solitude we craved would take a sinister turn. The cabin was rustic but charming, with large windows that offered a breathtaking view of the surrounding forest. On the first few days, we explored the nearby trails, enjoying the crisp air and the gentle rustling of leaves. It was the epitome of serenity, and we were content. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees, I heard a distant rustling outside. At first, I dismissed it as the typical sounds of wildlife, but the noise persisted and grew nearer. My unease deepened. I stepped onto the cabin's porch, peering into the darkening woods. The silhouette of a man emerged from the shadows, approaching slowly. His features were obscured by the dim light, but he appeared disheveled and bore a haggard, unsettling aura. His voice quivered as he introduced himself as David, claiming to be a local hiker who had lost his way. He asked if he could use our phone to call for help. I hesitated, my instincts urging caution, but my wife was more sympathetic. We reluctantly invited him inside. David seemed jittery and kept casting furtive glances through the cabin's windows. We offered him our phone, and he made a brief call before nervously ending it. His erratic behavior only intensified our unease. As the night deepened, David refused to leave, citing the darkness as too treacherous for navigation. My wife and I exchanged worried glances, but we couldn't simply force him out into the woods. We reluctantly offered him the couch for the night. I barely slept that night, my senses on high alert. The cabin's creaks and groans seemed amplified, and every noise outside stirred dread within me. The cabin felt less like a haven and more like a prison. Morning arrived, and David was gone. His abrupt departure left us feeling both relieved and unsettled. We couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something was amiss. To ease our unease, we decided to pack up and leave the cabin behind, heading to the nearest town. It wasn't until we arrived at the town sheriff's office that we learned the chilling truth. David, the man we had invited into our cabin, was a dangerous fugitive. He had been evading the law for weeks, and his criminal history was rife with violence and unpredictability. My heart raced as I contemplated what could have transpired during that ominous night. The realization that we had unwittingly harbored a dangerous criminal sent shivers down our spines. We provided our statements to the authorities and cooperated fully in the subsequent investigation, but the memory of our harrowing encounter still haunts me. It was a vacation turned nightmare, a reminder that sometimes, even in the most serene of settings, danger can lurk in the shadows, waiting to disrupt the tranquility we seek.